Okay, and we're back with part two of working on the campfire. We left off, I got most of the logic completed for the tile. I went ahead and pre-implemented most of what we're going to need for the block, but we didn't test anything so far. Now we're going to move on to getting ready to start testing, and before we do that, I'm going to go ahead and knit some more data out. So one thing I didn't do is we actually got to register our tiles and stuff. So public static block campfire, block campfire. So put that there. We'll go ahead and initialize it. So it'll be new block campfire. Then it's game registry dot register block campfire, and then we'll do wj campfire. And then we'll go ahead and register the tile entity too. So register tile. If you don't register the tile entity, your tile will never load. It will exist, so you can utilize it, but if you go to save and then load again, it won't load. Also, Forge will bitch at you. So tile entity campfire.class, and we'll just call it the same thing as the block. And we need to go over here and we need to make that public, or we can't access it. Okay, so that's registered. That means it'll now show up in the game. What we need to now do is go over here and set the creative tab real quick. So set creative tab, creative, or actually survival mod dot creative tab. And that'll show up on our creative tab for the survival mod. I'm actually going to set the creative tab to the campfire. So let's go down and yeah, we'll just do that real quick. Yeah, so we'll have to do item dot get item from block, and it'll be campfire. The reason we're going to do it this way is the campfire will be more recognizable than a remote control item for C4. At least that's the ideal. So we'll leave that there. That's all registered, that's all initialized. We'll do a localization real quick. So this will be tile dot woe judo, and then will be campfire dot name equals campfire. If we go over there, that should match. Yep, campfire, and that'll translate as soon as we log in. That's all good. We need to do our open GUI here, so we'll leave a mark here saying we need to do a GUI open. Open GUI, which means on our common proxy we need to implement iGUI handler. Now you don't have to put your GUI handler on your proxy. It is, however, suggested because it's an easier way to handle things. And we're just going to do, we'll just do it this way. So go tile entity, tile equals world.get tile entity x, y, z. So we're going to use the tile entity to identify what GUI we're opening. You can use the ID, it works. I prefer to use tile entities more often than not because you can't make mistakes that way. Because if you know it's a campfire, then you're going to be opening the campfire GUI. And of course, we don't have a campfire GUI, but we're going to go ahead and replicate code here. So we're going to copy this. We're not actually going to implement the client GUI on this here. We are going to go over to the client proxy here, and we're going to implement it over here. The reason you do this is you don't want to be loading client-side code on the server, and you don't want to be loading server-side only code on the client. Although, because it's a common proxy, this will be loaded on both sides because we want the container on both sides, but we don't want the GUI on the server. But in here, yeah, we're just going to return something. So we'll go ahead and make the classes for the containers here. So we'll go Java GUI campfire extends GUI container base. Now I'm going to use the prefab from VoltEngine because I do not like making GUIs. It's one of the least things I actually like to do in Minecraft because there's no real structure to Minecraft GUIs. When you render a GUI in Minecraft, you're doing the same amount of work it takes to render an item or something. So when you render GUIs, you do item rendering. But my prefabs have a lot of helpers that just make life easier. And actually, I need to go and I want this right here. So we're going to need to keep track of the container, and we're going to need to keep track of the entity players. So this will be, what do we need to rename this? And then we want to do Java class container campfire, and then we're going to do the same thing. We're going to extend container base. This will give us some helper methods too, like being able to create the inventory right off the back. So when we go to create the player inventory, it's literally like add player inventory player. That's the reason why I have prefabs, is that just saved me a lot of work, because if we actually go look at the player inventory, this is the player's inventory right here. It'll also keep track of our player usage here. So if we open up a container, it'll go, hey, there's another player looking at your tile inventory. And we will go ahead and implement that in a second, because in order to implement that, you got to use this. My prefabs by default use this, but the campfire is not using one of my prefabs, so we'll have to implement that ourselves. So that's there, and then we just got to add slots to here. So if we actually go look at container furnace, I'm just going to go copy its slot positions to save myself time. This is what the container furnace looks like. It has a lot of other things, like here's your packet data for your actual GUI elements and stuff. It detects and sends changes. We could actually do this for our packet handling, but I'm not going to do that for our packet handling. There's a lot of other stuff in here. We will probably copy this here, the transfer stack and slot. I have not figured out how this works precisely. I've got a slight inkling of how it might work, but because I don't want to spend like an hour or 2 hours recording myself frustratingly digging around at it, we're just going to copy and paste it, because the campfire we're making should work identically to the furnace. So in reality, I could have extended the furnace code and my code would have worked just the same. But that's not what we're going to do. We're just going to copy a few slots out of it. So we got the same exact slot position data. So we're going to do inventory here. I may need to change these IDs here real quick. We got the player, and my headset's running out of power, so I need to grab a power cable real quick. Sorry for the noise. There we go. This will be inventory. So what we need to do is, one, this needs to be changed to campfire. So we're going to call this tile entity campfire, and then we'll rename it to campfire. Okay, and that power cable is going to get my way while I'm working. Unfortunate thing is I didn't charge my headset before I left this morning to go do errands, and now my headset's pretty much dead. The tile entity campfire, so slot 1 should be our input slot. This is our output slot. So tile entities campfire dot slot output. This uses a furnace slot. What this really pretty much does is when you pull the item out, you can't stick it back in. It also triggers crafting events and a few other things, so the GUI's update. It's optional to use. A few of my machines I don't use it because I don't really care if you shove stuff back in slots. Although I need to fix this real quick because I used the wrong one for that. Input slot, and then this should be the fuel slot. And we're just going to change the IDs around. How this works, by the way, is when we add a slot to this, this is a object that actually will keep track of the inventory, the slot ID, and the display position on the GUI. I don't know why they actually don't use this in their inventory code. If I go up to the game I am working on right now, if I pull it open and if I can find it, cancel on that. My inventory code uses a slot object as the actual storage position. This way I can keep track of the position where that slot is in the array. I can keep track of a root position, because of course the game I'm working on doesn't have a Minecraft style inventory. It actually has a Diablo style inventory where your items are actually multiple size, and it lets me do other things. If Minecraft did that, we could actually have multiple slot items in Minecraft, but we can't do that without hacking the crap out of the game. That's done. That's everything we need. We don't really need anything else, except I'm going to go copy that huge method at the bottom if I can go. Okay, I don't need the furnace. Shoot, I copied, or I closed it. So container. So we're going to go open container furnace again, and I'm going to go copy that whole method down here. And I'm probably going to have to rename the slots, but that's fine. As long as it works, I don't have to worry about things. Okay, we go like that, and we now got to figure out what each slot does. Okay, So our output slot is slot 1, and our fuel slot is slot 2. Is fuel. So this is the output slot right there. So I need to go up. Actually, why am I in this class file? I need to read this one. Okay, so this is our output slot. And then we need to go, okay, input slot, which is 0. And then fuel slot, which is 1. Okay, so is there a fuel slot also slot 2? You know what? We need to go. We need to go open the tile entity for the furnace and see if I got the slot IDs the same. Okay, so 0, 2, and 1, 1, furnace inventory. Okay, so their fuel slot is slot 1. And if we go find my code real quick, actually I need to real quick since we're in this one, return new container campfire, and then we just need to pass in the tile. So we got a cast. Container campfire is player, then okay, so I need player, and then I need to cast to the campfire myself because IntelliJ doesn't want to cast for me automatically. Usually you can click on it and it'll go, hey, do you want to cast? And this time it doesn't want to do that. Then we'll go, since we have the client proxy open real quick, return new GUI campfire, and then we want to do the same thing, player, and then cast tile entity campfire, and then tile. And then we have to go to our campfire real quick because then we want to do super dot new container campfire. And then up here we want to do entity player, tile entity campfire, fire. The reason we're creating a container here is this container is used only by the GUI, and it just basically tracks what the server is seeing. So the server has its own container, then the client has its own container, then the server syncs data from its version to the client, and then they read into the container. So you have a separate version on your client, and the GUI then needs a separate version to run. We'll go back here. I can get rid of that. So let's go open my my fireplace here. Okay, so we'll come over here. Our fuel slot is 2. And then our output slot is 2 for the furnace. And you know what? We can switch these real quick. And then my code will work exactly the same. This is the reason why you use these, by the way, when you're doing your new slots, is anytime you need to come back through here and redo your slot numbers for whatever reason you want to do it, just change these numbers up here and the rest of your code will work just fine. You don't have to worry about anything, you don't have to like handle anything special, you're just done. That's all good. That means when I go to mess with the container here, this will work without me screwing with it. Which means I need to hit Control Z a couple times so I can restore these back to their default values, because these should match. No, actually, those should match just fine if I put them there. So that was 0 and 1 down here, so that was fuel, which was the 1, input slot, which was my 0, and then 2 is my output. Yeah, we're good. This is the part where I said I don't really understand how the transfer stack, because what this does is when you shift right click, this is the code that tells the game how to shift right click. And it's a little confusing because you're not only handling the tiles inventory in this class, you're handling the player's inventory. And that's where I get confused, is like, how does this function? Let me go ahead and rename a couple things here. So player, and this is slot index. As this works somehow, but I haven't figured out quite how it works. It's mainly because you have these parts. You get like merge stack and you have a 0 and a 1 here. And if we actually go look at this, it doesn't give me any documentation. So if I wanted to figure this out, I actually have to spend some time like digging through this, and I don't want to do that because it works or it doesn't work. There actually is, I believe, a client-side duping issue with one of my mods because this doesn't work. Luckily, it's client-side only, which means if it duplicates an item, it's a ghost item, which doesn't actually exist. So I've yet to fix it, and usually every time somebody complains about it, I just remove the shift-click load. This works. This works now. So our GUI will function. If we go back over to the block class, how you do your GUIs is it's player.openGUI. You have to give a mod instance, so it'll be survival mod.instance, which I don't think we have a variable for. I'll do that really quick. You then pass in the world, X, Y, Z, and I believe an ID. So let's open this up real quick. Oh, it's ID, then the world location. So in this case, since we're not using the ID variable, we just pass in 0. And then I just need to create a field real quick. And this will be survival mod. The reason why you need the instance is because there's only one GUI handler for your entire mod. And I'm actually going to have to register the GUI handler somewhere in here. So I believe it's game registry.register GUI. No. I'm going to have to go look at one of my other mods real quick. I'm going to have to do that anyways because I need to get the instance variable. There's a special way you have to implement them. We'll go over to ICBM real quick. So how the instance variable works is you have to put add instance in your domain. You can also just, when the pre-init's called, set your instance variable, but you want to do it this way because then Forge will set your instance for you. Now if we go back over here, we have to go to here real quick. Apply modular. Aha, this is what we're looking for. Network registry, and then we need to register everything. That registers our proxy as the GUI handler. This is what I was saying is you actually could have a separate class for this and be loading it and initializing it. The common way I was taught how to do this was use the proxy, and it works out really well because that's exactly what your proxy is designed for. Your proxy is designed to load a separate version of itself for each side of Minecraft. So you have your client proxy and then you have your server proxy. You would load client-only code on the client proxy, server-only code on the server proxy, and then you'd have a common proxy that both extend, that you load code that's supposed to run on both sides. And that works. And then of course you can only open GUI server side this way. So I need to check if is remote. If you open a GUI client side this way, it has a tendency to crash. You still can open GUI's client side, but it works differently. The way it works differently is you literally just call player.container.set to the GUI you want to set to. I have a few GUIs that work that way. I'll show it off if I ever get around to working on those again. But this, if we right click, we'll now open the GUI and we'll see everything. There's a couple more things I got to do before we can launch, and then we can test to make sure everything works. So in the GUI, I've got to tell it to render my inventory slots. Because as I said, I got special handlers for slots. Normally how you would do GUIs is you would create a texture. That texture would then have your slots on it. I can actually show this real quick. I think one of the ICBM Classic GUIs has its own inventory slots. So source, main, resources, assert, textures, GUI. Okay, here we go. So this is, I believe, the radar. As you can tell, I've got slots rendered on here, and you would do that yourself. When we go to do stuff with the newer code that we have, we no longer put the slots in there. How we actually do it is I'll go ahead and show the base texture we're going to be using, if I can remember where it's at. So Volts Engine. By By the way, one thing I like to point out is the reason why there's so many more files in the VoltsEngine folder is the VoltsEngine is our base workspace. If I actually go into run, here is our mods folder, and here's all the normal stuff you would see as a user playing the game. I have a lot more stuff in here because it has to build up everything. VoltsEngine actually does all the work for our projects. But if we go here, I go source, main, resources, assets, VoltsEngine, textures, GUIs. We do have versions that do have the slots in them, but these are the ones we actually use when we go to render things. There's no slots on here. When I call a certain method, it will render all the slots on the GUI for me. It's not as performance friendly as doing this version, but from a developer point of view, I don't have to do the slots. And I'm actually going to be working on this more to the point where we have a JSON file that describes how the GUI renders, and then we can do away with our GUI classes eventually. The goal is, while I'm working on the updates here later, is that I want to remove as much code from my projects as possible and move over to as much data as possible. That way, as I work, I will get to a point where I can release a mod across multiple Minecraft versions. That's been my goal I've been trying to work on for like the last 2 or 3 years. You saw an example of it like Nova, which is what Cal Clavier went and worked on. That was the same ideal. I didn't end up working on him with that project. 1, I didn't want to work with him, and 2, I didn't like the way they were trying to handle everything. But let's go back in here, and I believe I want to draw the background layer. Let's go find the method real quick, and we'll see where it's used. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff in here. Some of this code I haven't updated yet. Some of this I have. This is the code we're going to end up using. Okay, here we go. Yeah, one of the NPCs already has inventories. No surprise. But this is exactly the code we want. We're going to copy that real quick and just go through it here. And I'll tell what this does. GUI draw background, we're drawing the background of the GUI. This is where the actual texture is drawn. So if I actually go to the super here, we get the container width, so the size of it. We then bind our texture, which is our GUI, set the color to default, and then we render a rectangle with that texture. It's the same render code that items use in your inventory. It's not much different. But here what we want to do is we want to loop through our inventory slots, which, because Minecraft is what it is, it's a list, which doesn't tell us what the object is. So we're going to have to check if it's a slot just in case somebody puts something into that list that it shouldn't be there. If it's a slot, we draw the slot and then we're on the screen. And that's it. That's literally all the code we need. We'll have to come back to the GUI here later, but I won't do that in the video, and we'll have to put the name of the screen on there and a few other things that are missing. I'll handle that later. Actually, I think the super might actually handle that for us, so we may just have to rename a few things. But the tile's working. That means that we have an inventory. All this code should work. Yeah, we're good to go. So we're gonna hit debug launch Minecraft, and we're just gonna launch it and wait for it to run. And another thing we got to add is I've got to add progress bars to tell you what the cook time is. I'll get to that here later because I got to copy over a few GUI elements that we don't have available in the default base texture sheet, namely the fire renderer and the arrow bar. And then of course I got to do the tile entity special render here too. Let me go ahead and do that while we're waiting. So this will be gl11.gl push matrix, and then gl11.gl pop matrix. The interesting thing is push and pop is also used by your actual computer to actually push data onto the stack and then pop it off the stack. And then of course you guys don't know what stack is, but oh well. gl.gl translate. So we're going to translate by X, Y, and Z, and we're going to have to probably move this a little bit. Then we want to call, we'll call model.render all, and then we want to do, there's a method call I want to do here. I need to open one of the other mods real quick first. We'll open the grappling hook. I need to grab the texture bind method because I can never remember what it's called. Yeah, it's this one right here, because it's like it's a huge list that you have to call to get that, and we need to bind a fake texture to this real quick because we don't have a texture. And this will be shared assets dot grade texture. I have a shared assets handler where we actually register common textures. This is where we actually get our GUI textures from that you saw in those folders, are actually registered here, or they're loaded here. Then I've got a gray texture and a gray alpha 40. Gray alpha 40 is used by the shockwave textures for the EMPs. And then we got our tool table here. Eventually, Voltage is going to get its own custom crafting table that's going to be used. It won't be used to replace any crafting, but the ideal is that the more advanced recipes, we'll start to use it to make life easier. Because if you guys have ever played GregTech, you have to like keep track of all these tools and then keep track of screws and bolts and everything, and you got to put them in your recipes. I don't want to do that, but at the same time, I want to make sure you guys are actually using tools to make the recipes more realistic, but not have to deal with placing everything in the crafting grid. It'll be a list-based crafting system, much similar to Terraria and a few other mods, and we'll be implementing that. I'm just going to wait for this game to load. I've modded for a lot of games. This is the only game that takes a ridiculous amount of time to load. I mean, you get Skyrim. Skyrim even loads quicker than this, and Skyrim has probably one of the more complicated modding systems I've ever seen. So let's see, what else do we got to touch up on this? I do need to check real quick if we need to save and load. Yeah, we're going to have to save and load the inventory, so that's one thing we're going to have to add. So we're going to do if inventory modular doesn't equal null. We want to check directly rather than calling like get inventory. We want to check directly if the inventory module exists. That way, if it doesn't exist, we're not going to write it. However, up here, we're always going to check if it exists. We're going to go with mbt.haskey inventory. Then we'll go get inventory .load. And I actually need to wait until next time we restart to do this, so because I need to actually implement something here, but we can't do that because it won't cause it to crash, but I won't be able to reload in case we need to fix any of the logic in the update loop. This is something I'll do later, but the code's really basic. Is I'll just call get inventory load here and get inventory save here. It'll be mbt tag compound tag equals new mbt tag compound, and then I would call the save method there, and then you go mbt.setTag inventory. Make sure that these two match each other, and then I'll store the tag. And then here we would go mbt tag compound tag equals mbt.get compound tag, and then inventory. You check if the tag exists, that way you don't initialize an inventory every time you load. That works out pretty good. Almost loaded Minecraft. And if you guys haven't noticed yet, I'm playing Factorio in the background. I'm right now taking a break from it, but I got a lot of work to do. I might start recording me playing it, but overall, I usually am sitting around AFK playing it. Occasionally we do things, but if I actually pull it over to the main screen real quick. There's my huge, massive base and giant pollution cloud and the biters we're trying to kill and everything else. It's a good thing to do, mess with another game while you're waiting. If you actually are developing Minecraft and you have a huge load times, find something to do, like doodle, look at Imgur on your phone, tweet, Facebook, YouTube. I usually am watching YouTube when I'm working, when I'm not recording. It's a good habit to make. I watch a lot of educational videos on YouTube, which is kind of really helps, because when you're any profession, it doesn't even matter what profession you're in, always try to learn something outside of your profession, because it may help you in your profession. Like I go and I learn about, say, medieval knights, and then I'm sitting here as a programmer. If I ever have to program weaponry and stuff, I may know about that information. But one of the more things that actually will shock people is I've actually learned how to write better algorithms by paying attention to how farmers farm, because a farmer has figured out how to optimize his field farming-wise to get the most crops out of his field in the quickest amount of time. And when we make algorithms for programming, that's the same idea we want to do. We want to process the most data in the shortest amount of time. But what we're going to do, okay, we're going to do test the fire. Had a nice lag spike there from the fact I'm running way too much stuff. Okay, here's our campfire, which is going to render, not going to render the way we want to render it. But if I right click, here's our GUI. Ignore the numbers, this is for debug. I have a debug system set up and I have yet to make a button to turn it on and off. I'll eventually get to that, but if we put, say, oak logs in the inventory here, we can then, actually we can't smell anything because we don't have recipes, but the GUI works. We don't have description packet or anything, and I need to restart to test it. The collision box is working if you guys don't notice that already. The selection bounds didn't update, and there's a few other issues. So I'm going to have to restart anyways, unfortunately, because I wasn't paying attention. And I forgot to register the renderer. So we'll have to actually go out and do that again. This gives me a chance I can go up here and I can do external inventory, which is what I actually want to do. And then we got to do it here, change it to external inventory. Because that's what we're using as external inventory, and external inventory has save code in it, which I can't call directly without casting. And I wanted to make sure we put that before I start calling save and load on it. So this will be get inventory dot save, and we call tag. And this will cause it to save into this tag object, which then we set to the MBT. The MBT is the actual world save system. And we go up to here, we'll go get inventory load, and of course this is all custom data. How this ends up working, if I actually go show you the code, is I'm storing my inventory in a hash map system. It's slightly more efficient than using an array, and only reason it's more efficient is because if you have half of an inventory, you're actually using half as much data. But if you have an array the same size as a hash map lengthwise and is completely full, then the array technically is better. But then also the access time, well actually in general the arrays are usually better. But I use a hash map because it actually allows for empty inventories, and really large inventories actually you can access quick with them and stuff too. But overall it doesn't really modify the behavior by a huge amount. I'm actually going to be looking into some alternatives to using this as well. There's a few different techniques I'm thinking about checking into. But this does work. So we got our, when we call to load, of course we clear the inventory because we don't want to have a previous inventory set in there. We then get our items tag and we just load it and we go by slots. When we save, we just save by slots and everything else. Works out really well. That's our code for saving. Then we need to register our render code because I forgot to do that. This is the wrong mod. Go back up to this mod. Okay, here's our client proxy. And then in here we want to do I don't think I use render registry. I think it is Minecraft Forge client dot register. No, it's not that. Maybe it's I'm gonna have to go look up what this is because it's been so long since I've used the Minecraft tile system. I've got a prefab system built into Volts Engine where I actually have my own interfaces and everything for rendering. And there's literally only one tile in the render class for the entire Volts Engine system. ICBM uses it and everything. So that means I have to go all the way into Volts Engine itself and go find where this is registered at. Okay, there's client proxy. Ah, here we go. Render, it is render registry. That's actually, that's the entity renderer. There's the block handler. That's weird. Okay, we'll open the render registry and just see if it's in here. Register block, register world block. I have misplaced it. I must not use it anymore. That's my reason why I might not be able. Oh no, I actually know exactly where it is now. I forgot I have a registry handler system. So unlike where people call game registry.register block, I actually call mod manager, which is there's a new mod manager per object, and this has its own proxy system. And in the client registry proxy is where we actually register the tile entity renders. So there's our item renderer for our tile entity, and right here, client registry dot register this. And we register a dummy renderer, which actually allows us to encapsulate all of our render code. This is something me and Calcalavia came up with a long time ago, and it works really, really well. So tile entity, render campfire. So there we go. We registered it, so that will render now. What is the last piece of code we need to do? I actually need to go to the block class real quick and tell it to start using the render code. So if we go to the block right here, and it's get render type, I believe, and I believe it's -1 is what it you use for tile entities. Okay, so that should do everything we need. Yeah, that looks good. Okay, so we want to run and then debug. Now we gotta wait for it to load again, which I'm just gonna go show off Factorio here because even though this is meant to be a development video, why not? So yeah, I got the World of Factorio. I've actually been considering making mods for this quite often, and I might start actually doing that here soon, and I'll make videos for that. And by soon, I mean maybe like in a month. It's really hard to say when I'm going to get to things. But yeah, you got your standard huge factory thing. Now we're playing with mods. We're playing with Bob's mods particularly. It adds a little bit more complexity to the game and allows the game to take longer to play. If you play with vanilla, you can beat the game in about a day if you know exactly what you're doing. If you play with Bob's mod, it can take you a week to beat the game. Now, I know some of these may be saying like, oh, is it the GregTech equivalency for Factorio? It's actually not. Because of how Factorio is designed, GregTech style mods play better in Factorio than they do in any other game. Because with this, you have automation. So you're not handcrafting anything. So if you go to want to craft wires, you craft in a machine and you feed into your chip factories, and you feed those into like everything else, and you build microchips, and then those microchips can then be transferred with logistic robots everywhere. You build everything automatically. It's about the same ideal that I'm working on with assembly line. Now, a cool thing to say, I didn't copy the assembly line is not based off Factorio. It's actually the other way around. I've actually had the dev admit that he was inspired by mods like assembly line and mods like I forget the whole list of mods, but he used to play Minecraft, and he actually liked a lot of the automation of Minecraft. And then when he went to go make his own game, he made his game similar to how you play Minecraft. You have these single tile conveyor belts, which share about the same texture as my assembly line mod does. And you place them around, and you move items around, and you've got chest and automation. And assembly line is going to have a lot of the same features because the original version had the same features too. Now, I'm not going to be doing things like mining machines, so assembly line is not going to have that. Assembly line is not going to have generators. It's going to focus almost entirely on conveyor belts, because that's after all what the mod's about, and it's going to have some automated factories. Now, the automated factories I'm working on actually are going to be using robotic arms, so you have like robotic arms like this. So in assembly line, you'll have something like this, and then in the middle, you'll have a crafting machine, or say you had a conveyor belt, which then had something crafting on it. You'd have a conveyor belt coming down through the middle with an item on it. It would stop, robotic arms would work on it, and then it would move on. And that ideal, by the way, has come from actual automated factories, because I used to work in a factory for a while that built electronics. And that's the same way they did things, except instead of it being a robotic arm, they still used people. I felt kind of bad for those people. They got paid crap to put electrical parts in boards, because you had the automated machine would do all the surface mounted parts, and it did it really, really well. So they did have robotic arms that built chips and built the boards. But if you had through hole parts, which a through hole part compared to a surface mounted or like a piece of paper, they just attach to the board, and then a through hole looks like a staple. It has two little hooks that go through the board, and then they'll solder those on, and they'll clip off the extra hooks. My job at the factory, by the way, was I repaired stuff. So if the board failed and got broken or damaged, it would come back to my area. I would remove the damaged parts. I would clean the board up. I would repair it, then take it back to the assembly line where it would go through the check systems, and then it would come back to me if it was still broken. I was really good at my job. I could surface mount, solder just about anything. I got to the point where I was soldering 240 pin chips in under a minute. I can't do that anymore, unfortunately, because the nerve damage in my hand sucks. Damn, Minecraft is still loading. Guess I'll walk around here. We've got copper production. This game has tons of content in it. Even the vanilla game's got tons of content. You got all these little robotic arms, upgrades for conveyor belts. factories, solar panels. This is the reason why it's so nice of a game. And unfortunately, not a lot of people play it because it is not an easy game for people to grasp. Although the concepts are pretty easy. You have inputs, you have outputs, and you're done. It's just people can't grasp the fact that you have to do conveyor belts, take conveyor belts to things, and do like a whole bunch of connections. So, I mean, like you got these huge connections just to do things like copper tungsten plates. This whole entire area is just dedicated just to that production. And of course, we're producing dirt down here because I have no clue why. This entire area up here is dedicated just to uranium production, so we can build depleted uranium shells. As well, we do produce fuel rods for our nuclear reactors, and we have a nuclear reactor there, there, and there. And that is barely powering our base. Now here's actually some of our fuel rod production up here. So these are fuel rod, 4.7%. And then we got some fuel rod production down here as well. Here's our oil production up here. Sadly, I wish the game would make its oil production more complicated, because you literally have this little refinery object, and in real life there's so many parts to a refinery. I'm actually been studying how it works because I want to make a mod that comes really close to realism, not because I want to make life harder on people in Minecraft. I actually want to do it just because it can work as a teaching tool and allows people to build really creative, amazing bases. Which, by the way, this game does have something equivalent to Redstone. We have logic controllers. I'm actually using this to automatically turn my refineries off when they're not being used. That way I'm not wasting oil up here. And it also regulates the amount of fuel I have in here. Really nice setup. Really simplistic, just Boolean gates. Here's chip production down over here. This little area belonged to Dragonfire. It's actually not being used for much. I think we finally started building like aluminum batteries down here. I mean, not aluminum, lithium, I think is what these are. Yeah, lithium-ion batteries. We got chips over here. We're building robots right here. So I can pick these guys up and I can toss them out. Try not to get rid of all my robots, because I was actually carrying some in my inventory. Put some more. Yeah, these guys are great. I actually have been trying to put these in Minecraft, but every time I do it, they're too laggy. And once again, I'm not copying that from Factories. I tried to put those in Minecraft back in like 1.1, I believe. Back before Factorio existed. They were called Artilex is what they were called. One of the goals of the Artilex was to actually build really intelligent robots. And damn, it is still loading. Come on, Minecraft. Get with the show. We'll walk around some more here. We got train automated systems. These are actually full-size trains. Thanks to Yoki's Trains mod, we got a lot of different decorative trains. The vanilla trains literally come in like 1 or 2 colors, and that's it. Big storage house. I made a mistake when I built this. This is not efficient whatsoever, but it does serve the needs. We're producing copper down here. We're actually starting to ship our resources to refinery locations. We were refining everything in base. The goal now is to start building refinery bases that we can actually drag resources to. So right now we got a copper refinery base down here. This is a prototype that I'm trying to toy with to see how it's going to work. It loads it onto a train, and then the ideal would be the train would go over here to this side of the base over here and offload, then come back, reload here, and then say if we wanted to start producing stuff, we can say like put a factory over here and we'll start producing things, and then we drag it back to the main base, and then we can drag stuff over here and maybe build stuff. Right now we're surrounded by biters. Biters will destroy our stuff. Minecraft loaded yet? Oh, looks like Demon's going to be working late. Aha! It's loaded. I can go drag this to the other screen, and we can go test things. As I said, if you go to become a mod developer, find something to do while you're developing. Some of my interns like to go play Call of Duty, Overwatch, stuff like that while they play. So they'll do a match, and then they'll come back and code, and then they'll do a match and come back and code. Also, make sure if you ever become a developer, take breaks. I work too long personally. I'll actually work like 4 to 8 hours straight without stopping. That is a really bad idea. There's a reason why we have OSHA regulations for factories and stuff that say a worker can only work 2 hours, then is given a 15-minute break, works another 2 hours, gets a lunch, works another 2 hours, gets another 15-minute break. This is our tower here. Unfortunately, the model is about the size of everything. I'm going to back up here. Yeah. This is our campfire model. See how large it is? I've been having issues with scaling because Morton doesn't know the proper scale to pre-scale everything before it goes into Minecraft. One of my other asset developers, Dragonlord, actually did figure it out at one point, and he gave me the numbers And if we go over to our tile renderer, so we're going to go gl11.gl scale, and we're going to go 0.0625 is I think what it is. Now this will not work on your guys' model, so if you guys make a model and you import it in, this number is probably not going to work. But this is I think like 1/60th scale is what this is. And this should get us close. I'm going to have to scale it down a little bit more because I think Morton's models are now even further off scale than they used to be. Yeah, they're even further off scaled. And they're also now following me around. I need to scale after I translate. I forgot about that. You want to translate first, you then want to scale, then you want to rotate. Always in that order. If you don't do it in that order, you're going to have a hard time. See, it's now in the proper spot. I'm going to probably have to divide this by 3. This is the scale I've been using lately to fix this stuff. Okay, close. It's close. It's too big still. It's also not centered right. When you bring models in, half the time they're not going to be centered. You're actually going to have to do like something like this. If you use a Techni model, you're actually not only have to move it in the X, you're going to have to go +1 in the Y. That's usually Techni models by default. And if you use my Techni model loader, it's a little easier. You don't have to necessarily do that, but there we go. That is now in the right spot. The scale is still off. We're going to divide. We're going to actually catch our scale, so kind of float. Scale equals this value, and then we'll do that. And if you put an F behind it, it'll trick Java into going like, hey, this is a float. And then I believe Grogger's trying to get my attention here. We'll talk to him here later, though. I'm not going to do that in the video because I'm almost done here. Okay, I need to do that by 4. So get me close. As long as I get within 1 block tile, the client won't notice any difference. Did I reload that? It's still too big. Wow. So we're going to go into first person once I'm not walking around in third. You know what? It looks good enough. It's only slightly outside. We're gonna leave it that way. I'm not gonna scale down anymore. We're just gonna focus on fixing the textures. So we're gonna need. I'm not gonna restart it, and that means I can't fix the textures unless I can restart it, because you notice how it's pitch black? It should be gray with the gray texture on it, but because I forgot to tell the block is opaque, it's gonna be pitch black. I'm gonna fix that later, but this is all functional. All the recipes are here. I do have to do an item render here later to get the item render. Luckily, I do have a texture for this, so I don't actually have to do an item render. I just have to implement a texture. But I'll do that later, and we're just going to call this finished. I'll show you guys the final product here in another video, and we'll call that it. So I'll see you guys later.